This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze, your journey through life. And my guest today, Dr. Mort Orman, um, has found a way to, I don't know if we want to call it eliminate anger or learn to live with anger or less anger, I should say. Um, and you started out as a medical doctor, but I'm going to go even further back. When you were growing up, did you even think that someday I'm going to be a doctor and then I'm going to find an answer to how to eliminate anger from my life?
No, I did not. I did not. I did not grow up wanting to be a doctor. In fact, I grew up the opposite. I grew up definitely sure that I would never be a doctor, that I wouldn't like that. I didn't like anything about doctors or hospitals or needles or, anything. I didn't like sick people. I didn't like old people. I didn't like reading and studying. I didn't like any of the things that I imagined, a doctor would have to do. So it's actually interesting how I got on that path. Now, my parents were very interested in me being a doctor. That they were driving me hard, to go in that direction. But I knew I was no matter what they said, I was never going to do it. But I did get turned on to science and biology early on in my academic career. So I did have an interest in science. And when I went to college, I went to Duke, and I wanted to take the more advanced. I was a chemistry major. I needed to take the more advanced science courses. So that put me in the pre-med track, even though I had no intention of being a doctor. So, but it made my parents happy, and I knew it was not for me. And then also to make them happy, I applied to medical school. I knew I wasn't going to go, even if I got accepted.
But you did.
I got accepted, and then I had a conversation one day. I had like a 15-minute conversation that changed my life. I was applying for a biochemistry graduate school position at Duke, and I scheduled a meeting with the head of the department to, consider my application. So I walked in. He didn't know me. I've never met him. He didn't know me. And I told him my story, how I want to be a biochemistry researcher, applied to medical school to make my parents happy, got in, but I don't want to go. And he listened to me for a couple minutes, and then he looked me right in the eye. When it was his turn to speak, he looked me right in the eye and he said, "Are you some kind of an idiot?" Which was not at all what I was expecting him to say. And then he went on to say, he says, "Don't you know that if you want to be a biochemist and do biochemistry research, you'll be much better off with an MD degree than a PhD degree, like I am. Your life will be better. You won't have to be constantly chasing grants. You'll have more job opportunities." I didn't know any of that, okay? And then he said, "And don't you also know that a lot of people go to medical school, they don't end up becoming doctors. They do other things." I didn't know that either. I assumed the only reason to go to medical school is to be a practicing
Right.
doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
So he completely showed me how wrong I was about the whole, medical field and going to medical school. And he said to me, he says, "What's the worst that can happen? You go to medical school, you go for a year, you hate it, you drop out, you come back, I'll give you a position." So it's like he made it like easy. And so I said, "Okay, what do I have to lose?" So I went, and I didn't think I was going to end up being a doctor, but it turns out that during the 4 years, I got turned on to medicine. I got turned on to taking care of patients. I discovered that it wasn't all these awful things that I imagined it was, and
Sure.
all these that I didn't have the ability. I had plenty ability, as long as you do the work and you're paying attention and not goofing off and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of backed into it, and I really thank that guy for that head of the department.
Sure.
He really did me a service, and he did me a service by showing me how wrong I was about the way I was thinking, and I didn't even know that I was wrong. And he opened up the whole door of medicine, and I walked in, and it's been great ever since. So.
And you made mom and dad very happy.
Yes, not even trying to. I made them
Well,
deliriously happy.
I'm glad you did, because when I was going to college, my parents said, you know, you're going to go get a teaching degree because that's what all women do, and you'll have this wonderful life. And I said, I don't want a teaching degree. And they said, well, that's what we're paying for. So behind their back, I took communications. And when I ended up with my associate degree, my parents said, no more. You know, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
And they were right back in the day, because this was early 70s and there were very few women in communications back then. So I didn't make my parents as happy as you made yours. So, hey, but eventually I did. My mother, when I finally got my master's when I was in my late 50s, she said to me, are you a famous broadcaster? And I was podcasting from her apartment. And I said, I'm the most famous broadcaster in this room. And she looked at me and she goes, oh, I'm so proud of you. So
That's great.
but today we're going to talk about eliminating anger. And I think it's so important. And I almost wish I had realized that this was your topic months ago, because we've needed it the last couple of months as we're in this election year. And I even find my husband and I are on the same side, and yet we argue about it constantly. And it's like, why? We're on the same side. So talk to me how you got into this field of eliminating anger.
Yeah, well, I did it for myself initially because I had a lot of anger as a young man growing up. Now, as a child, I didn't. My parents didn't have a lot of anger. I didn't grow up in an angry family. I kind of developed I really got angry at myself as I went through medical training and things like that. Every time, if I didn't do something completely right or the way I thought I should, I had these high expectations of myself. I would get angry and frustrated, and then the anger would start to spill over into other areas. And so in my 20s and 30s, I started to, I was really angry. I took up tennis in my late 20s, and I was literally like John McEnroe on the tennis court. I mean, I was just yelling and screaming at myself and thrashing my rackets around and just disturbing people on either side of me. And I couldn't control it no matter what I tried to do. And when I opened my practice early on in the early years, I would get angry at my patients if they didn't, do the right things. They didn't follow my advice. They, made bad decisions, that kind of stuff, refused to do various tests and stuff like that. So I had this anger problem, and it ruined all my relationships with women. So they all failed eventually. They started out great, and then they would all fizzle, and anger was a big part of it. And I just didn't like the feeling of not being in control of my emotions, which I didn't know how to control. And most of the things that I had set my mind to, I was able to succeed at, but I could not figure that out. And I kept trying all the standard anger management stuff and stress management stuff. No matter what I did, man, I felt a little bit better, maybe, for a short time. But every morning I woke up, I was the same angry guy. It never changed. And as a matter of fact, if you'd asked me back then, could I imagine myself ever not being angry? I would say I think it's just part of my personality. Right. I think that's just the way I am, because I've tried so many times and so many different things to change it, and I can't. So that's just who I am. So you wouldn't have been able to convince me that I could eliminate it. But then a couple of years later, I figured out what was going on. I figured out what the source of my anger was within me that I had never learned before, despite all my education. And then I could put my hands on the controls, and then I could turn it on and off whenever I wanted to, particularly off whenever I wanted to. And then I spent the last 40 years of my life with very little anger. And it's been like amazing. I mean, my wife and I just celebrated our 40th anniversary. Would never have happened had I not figured this all out 40 years ago. After what I did is I started doing personal development work, because I had a sense that I didn't understand myself as well as I needed to. Sure. And medical school doesn't prepare you for that. And lo and behold, I was discovering all these things that I hadn't really seen or understood. And eventually I started putting things together, cobbling things together from different sources, and figured out what was causing me to be angry, how my brain was literally making me angry that I didn't understand. And that's a really key understanding that it's unfortunate we're not sharing with people in the education process today. Speaking about being a teacher,
Yep.
we should be teaching this stuff in junior high school, middle school. They call it middle school, high school, and definitely by the time you graduate college, you should know what causes your emotions inside you. You should understand what causes relationships to fail, what behaviors are toxic to relationship success. You have some basic things you need to understand. You understand stress, where it comes
Sure.
from, and people are not being really educated about that stuff. So I had to figure it out myself. Fortunately, I did. And then once I saw how much of a difference it made for me, of course, I'm taking care of patients. So I'm seeing the angry patients and the not so angry patients, and I'm seeing what happens to the angry patients. And they have a lot more health problems. They have a lot more divorces, addictions. They get fired from their jobs more, readily. And so you see all the adverse effects of anger. And here I figured out a solution, and I got to share this. I got to put this out in the world because it's destroying marriages. It's causing health problems. It's causing career problems. Enormous problem. Not to mention, on a global scale, you got
Right.
wars and conflicts and political divides and all this other stuff that's going on.
But it's interesting because I grew up in an era where, man, my grandmother used to always say it to me, honey, if you make somebody happy, you're going to be happy. And so I was constantly making people happy. And I did this through my 50s
Mhm.
to the point that I woke up one day in my 50s and I said, I think I'm really depressed. And it was my youngest son who looked at me and said, well, I'm glad you figured it out, Mom. Now, he was going through a lot of depression himself. But when he said it to me, I said, well, how do you see that? He said, because you don't know how to give a simple answer. And that's where my anger was. It was just coming out. I was just, instead of saying yes or no, I gave an explanation that had nothing to do with anything. And I looked at him and I said, let's sit down and talk about this.
Hmm.
And we did.
Good.
And I said, is this because you're depressed? He goes, I can recognize it in you. I just don't recognize it in me.
Hmm.
And so the two of us went into cognitive therapy, which was the
Good.
best thing both of us could do, because I couldn't tell you, what brought it on 50 years ago. And when this therapist said to me, I don't care about 50 years ago.
Mhm.
Well, how do you feel right now? What's causing it now?
Yes.
And it was like, I don't have to dredge all that up. But I think that's part of our poor mental health in this country, is that we're not taught how to recognize things as they're happening now.
And to recognize the internal causes, how we are generating those problems for ourselves, because it's all invisible. You can't see it. Like you couldn't even see your own depression, much less the causes of your depression. It's sneaky like that because our brain kind of does stuff to us and then protects itself from being discovered how it's doing stuff to us. It's got defense mechanisms and all that kind of stuff. So it's not going to allow you very easily to see how you're making yourself angry, for example. It doesn't want you to know the tricks that it uses. But it's literally tricking us every time it makes us angry. It's making us think in certain ways and perceive in certain ways that may not be completely true. But if you don't see that happening in the background, if you don't understand your brain is tricking you, then you're going to accept it as true. And if you do, then you're going to be angry. If you believe there's like three main, what I discovered 40 years ago is there's like three main filters your brain uses to make you angry. You, me, anybody, your son, anybody, your spouse, anybody else in your family. When they get angry, they're looking through, their brain is having them look through three main filters, and it's telling them that what they see is true.
Okay.
Okay. And the three filters are very simple. In fact, whoever's listening to this in your audience should write these down. because from today on, they'll never be confused about why they get angry. It's always these three filters. So the first filter is we're looking at the world or a situation or an event or something through the filter of somebody's doing something bad and wrong that they shouldn't be doing. So there's a bad and wrong judgment filter that we're looking through. The second filter is that because of the bad and wrong behavior, somebody's getting hurt or harmed or negatively impacted. Somebody or something. It could be, a possession of yours. It could be you. It could be a family member. It could be the planet. Somebody's damaging the planet. Something or someone's being hurt or harmed. And then the third filter is something I call unilateral blame. So it's a very narrow view of blame where you're only looking at the behavior of the person doing the bad and wrong thing. It's like you have horse blinders on.
Right.
You can only see what they're doing or what they did and their fault in the matter. You can't see any other causes that might be involved. Okay. Even if they're there, you won't see them because you have these blinders. The filter filters them out. So you get these three filters. Somebody did something bad and wrong. Somebody was hurt, harmed, negatively impacted. And the person who did the wrong thing was unilaterally responsible or to blame. Now, when you believe those three things are true, your body will create the emotion of anger. Your brain and your body will create the emotion of anger. The problem is, if you ever interrogated those three filters and really asked, and really did the hard work of asking, is it really true? Did somebody really do something bad and wrong? Did somebody really hurt and harm somebody? Was somebody really 100% unilaterally responsible to blame and nothing else played a role? If you start asking those questions, like I started to do 40 years ago when I saw what the mechanism was, all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, one or more of these is usually not completely true or not the way my brain is making me believe it's true. So you find out that most of the anger that you have is because you've misperceived something or misunderstood something or made a false assumption or had an incomplete picture of what was going on, A common example I use is, like everybody's had the experience of having somebody let you down when you made an arrangement with them to meet you, to transport you somewhere. It was really important and they knew it was important. And you told them how important it was for them to be on time and you're there on time and they're not. And 5 minutes go by and they're not there and you're starting to get a little bit angry. And you're starting to imagine all this stuff about how irresponsible they are and they didn't take it seriously and you should never trusted them in the first place. And, and then another 5 minutes go by and that just ratchets up even more. And then they come in, and then they come like 10 minutes late. And they tell you the story of how they were absolutely conscientious. They set out a half an hour early. They got caught in this huge traffic jam. They were trapped. They couldn't get out, and then as soon as you have those missing puzzle pieces, which you didn't know before,
right,
all the stuff that you had fabricated, that you had imagined just goes away. It's like, oh, they weren't being irresponsible. They weren't, doing a bad thing. Then the anger it vanishes. In the moment that you understand what really happened and they provide you with the missing puzzle pieces about what happened, now you're not angry. The anger literally disappeared. Okay. And because what was propping up the anger were some false assumptions that you had, that your brain gave you and told you were true in that moment till you found out otherwise. Okay. And that's how anger works all the time. We don't realize, and we don't always have the opportunity where another person comes and fills in the gaps for us,
right,
what the filter is leaving out or misperceiving. But if you do that work, if you learn how to do that, which is not that hard to do if you really put your mind to it, you just start asking those questions, you'll start to see, oh, wait a second, maybe it's not quite as true as I originally thought it was. Maybe I see something else now that I didn't see before, and that changes the whole flavor of what happened. I'm not angry now. I can see there's nothing to be angry about. So it works like that, and it's amazing how powerful just knowing the three filters, which now everybody knows. Okay, who's listening?
Right.
Knowing the three filters. Every time you get angry, just if you have them on an index card, just bring that index card out until you memorize them. Okay. And now you know why you're angry because you're looking, and I've done this a gazillion times with people when I coach people in my anger program. Before I even start coaching them, I say, give me 5, go in your memory bank, just pick 5 examples of any time you ever got angry about anything. Okay. And they do. And then I teach them the three filters. And then I say, okay, now let's take your first one on your list. I was angry because my brother did X, Y, and Z. Okay. Were you looking at his behavior as being bad and wrong, something he shouldn't have done? Yes. Were you thinking somebody got hurt or harmed or negatively impacted? Yes. Were you thinking he was totally responsible or to blame? Yes. And I could do it with you. If you take anything, if you want to take any example recently where you got angry, you'll see that those filters are why you got angry.
Well, you know, I didn't know about your three filters, but what is interesting, 2 years ago when I decided to use my education and go get my certification to do life coaching, one of the things I learned in life coaching was all the anger I was holding regarding my first husband. Really, now I see it's those three filters. But when I was going through the training, I said to myself, I've got to let this go. This has been 38 years. Why am I holding on to it? And I also realized that he wasn't all at fault. Number one, there were two people.
That's right. In a relationship, there's always two people.
And there were times that I blamed myself as well. But what I finally did when I pulled it apart was, number one, this is not serving me anymore. Number two, I did what I did back then based on not having the options in my brain, not knowing how to bring them out.
And your husband did the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a family where, I mean, my parents were married for 60 plus years, but you could see the tension. You could see them going head to head. And then you'd see them hug and kiss and everything was okay. Except they both always remembered that tension. So the next time it got compounded.
Yeah. But did you finally let go of that anger at your ex?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, it's the most relieving thing.
Yeah. But the way I can tell you the way you did it is you realized that those three filters were BS, or at least some of them were BS. Okay. Right. And you saw through that, and you saw it in a bigger, better, more truthful way. And that allowed you to let go of the anger. So, you know, we have this misconception about letting go. We think we have to like effort at letting go. Like you have to try to let go. No, the way you let go of anger is tell the truth about the three filters that are making you angry in the first place. And then when you do that, the anger drops away. You don't have to do anything. The doing is telling the truth and recognizing the three filters have misled you and your brain has misled you. And then realizing what the truth is. And then as soon as you recognize what the truth is, what really happened, and all the various ways you were at fault, he was at fault, and what you didn't know at the time, what he didn't know at the time, all that stuff, okay? You see that he wasn't really necessarily an evil person. You know, he wasn't necessarily trying to ruin the relationship. He just didn't know any better, as you didn't know any better how to salvage it when you saw it going bad, you know? So we're all in that kind of situation, but we tend to let the filters determine how we see things, and then our brain then wins at fooling us and making us angry. And by the way, the news media understands these three filters perfectly. Then their business model depends on being able to make people angry or anxious mainly. Okay. And they know the filters that cause anger and the filters that cause anxiety. They know how to feed us stories that make us angry.
Exactly.
Somebody did something bad and wrong. Somebody hurt and harmed or is going to hurt and harm somebody. They're 100% responsible to blame. Nothing else played a role. Nobody else is involved. Okay. And they write those stories and you believe them, you will get angry at whatever it is they want you to be angry about.
Well, as I mentioned, my younger son, he's on the autism spectrum, very high functioning, and he learns so much by reading like one paragraph of something, because then he goes on and researches and talking about the news as you are, he does get triggered. And I'm his sounding board, and he will call me now. It used to be when he would call me and talk to me about the news, I would get myself upset and angry. And now I sort of listen and I let a lot of it just filter out. If I can't do anything about it, if it's not affecting me at the moment, I may store it someplace and say, okay, I may need to be aware of this in the future, but I don't have to let it get me angry today.
Yes,
And
and you could be of service to him where you can in helping him see where, the truth may be broader than what he was told or what's
exactly.
getting him all worked up. I do that with my daughter. I have a daughter who's 37 now. And she gets very emotional at times and she'll get very upset at times. And when she gets really upset, she'll call me. And we live about 30 miles apart. She'll call me and I'll listen to her, and then I'll be able to sort of bring her back to what's really true, or be able to see the situation, whatever she has a blind spot about, what she's not seeing, or, I can suggest that she look at that, and usually she does, and she calms down, and because she's seeing it differently or seeing it in a more accurate sort of a way. So it's true for all of our emotions. And by the way, when I'm focused on anger because it's such a big problem in the world today, and people can learn so much about themselves and how their body and brain work by understanding anger. But it really is a cue to how all our other emotions work, because they just have different filters. But it's still our brain giving us filtered realities that may or may not be true. And a lot of times when we get upset, we get anxious or worried or sad or whatever, we're looking through filters that aren't really true, and we don't know it. We aren't prompted by anything normally to question the reality that our brain is giving us.
Well, I took a course 2 years ago on emotional intelligence,
Okay.
and that certainly helped me, question the things that I heard going on in my head. Okay.
Yeah.
And for many years, like I said, I was taught if you do good things to other people, you're going to be happy. And when I finally started cutting that mold and said, well, I like doing nice things.
Yes.
But I can't always be doing nice things because I'm leaving myself out.
Yes.
So I had to start to figure out what I can do. It makes me feel good.
Yes.
What I can't do, and not let that upset me that I'm not able to do those things.
Yes.
I have choices to make.
Yes.
And
so that's a good realization. That was a good realization.
And now knowing those three filters, it certainly is going to stop me and say, okay, wait a second. Like, where's that coming from and why? And
well, now you don't have to ask why anymore.
Know the why.
You don't have to ask why anymore. If you're angry, you know why now. Three filters. Somebody did something bad wrong, somebody hurt and harmed somebody was unilaterally responsible or to blame. You don't have to rack your brain anymore about why. Now, different emotions, you don't have the filters yet. But for anger, that problem is solved now. You never have to ask the question why again, because that's why.
So how did it help your patients? Because I know in the last couple of years, certain health conditions I was told I had, they're now looking at me going, we're going to keep that on your file, but we don't think it's there. Yeah, okay. And
That's
one
good.
was, they told me 2 years ago, maybe a little over 2 years ago, Karen, we think you're going through heart failure. Had all the symptoms of it. Then I started doing all this work on myself. And every time I go in, every 6 months, they'll look at me and go, we're sorry we told you that, but we're going to keep it there just in case we need to for insurance purposes.
Whoops, we made a mistake.
Yeah. So how do you help your patients? Because they keep looking at me like, we didn't do this for you. You did it for yourself.
Yeah. Well, first, I'm not practicing medicine anymore, so I'm retired from medicine. But and I didn't have this. I didn't have the book, my book that I released recently, to give my patients. I would have loved to have had that because I could have helped them. I knew that anger was an issue for them. But so now I'm helping people, not my patients per se, but now by writing the book, it talks about the three filters. It goes into much more depth about how I made my transition from being an angry guy to having 40 years with very little, last 40 years with very little anger. And it really gives them a lot of background understanding of where anger comes from. And then it gives them, what do you do with those three filters? How do you interrogate them? How do you get to the truth? How do you figure out what's true and what's not true? And there's all kinds of help in the book to help them do that. So I give them not just the filters, but I give them a system for investigating the filters so that they can figure out what's true. And that has been really, really helpful for people. Before I wrote the book, I would do a 10-session coaching program to take people through those steps, which was very powerful. I took people who've been angry all their lives,
Right.
they're in their 50s and 60s, and nothing's helped. And in 10 one-hour Zoom sessions, they're like completely new. They're like people who don't get angry anymore, or if they get angry, they know exactly where it's coming from and how to get rid of it. And they say it takes 10,000 hours to master anything, but it depends on what it is. If it's a simple system and you can learn it and use it, 10 hours is more than enough, to be able to do it. So I had great success with that. And that's really what prompted me to write the book, so I could get more people, get this information in the hands of more people. I really want to get it into schools if I can. I know it's hard to get anything into schools these days that comes from the outside, but eventually, maybe homeschooling, people will be more open to it. There may be some teachers that might want to do a pilot study or something. But if anybody's listening in your audience and wants to try something, on a pilot basis with introducing this book and the technology that I developed 40 years ago into the academic curriculum, I'd be more than happy to, explore doing something like that.
That would be so wonderful in the schools, because I don't want to use this generalization, but too many of our young people are going through a lot of anger.
Yes.
And when I was talking to my son yesterday, we were having this discussion. He said, Mom, if we had learned about our anger, now we knew there was anger in the house, but we blamed it on a lot of things. Number one, he was identified on the autism spectrum. So we had some people saying he doesn't really understand. And we had other people saying, oh, no, he understands more than you think he does. But my husband and I had no tools. We had no tools at the time.
Yep.
And because he's high functioning, most of the organizations sort of looked at us like, you don't need anything. You're fine on your own. But instead, there was a lot of yelling in the house. And then we'd calm down and we'd say we were sorry. And then it would happen again. So yesterday, just out of the blue, he said, I just wish we had known. He said, because now we can talk to each other. And he said, and if we get perturbed with each other, we know just to stop the conversation. Just walk away, take that deep breath, and then come back to it. And
well, let me share some. One of the stories I shared in the book, it would have relieved a lot of difficulties for me in my 20s and 30s. So there was a point in I think I was a second year medical resident, so I was in my mid 20s or something like that, where and I had been battling with my mother for years to try to get her to change how she was relating to me as I was growing up and all this kind of stuff. I started resenting her. And one day she just really ticked me off. it was a phone conversation. And I said, that's it. I don't want to talk to you ever again. I don't want you in my life. I'm happy to continue to have a relationship with Dad because we didn't have any problems, but I will not talk to you anymore. And then my father called like 10 minutes later. What the hell did you say to your mother? Get her so upset. And I explained, I said, Dad, it's not you. I'm fine with you. I just can't stand being around her anymore. I don't want to do it. I'm done. And he said, well, son, it's a package deal. If you don't want to talk to her, you don't talk to me. So for the next 7 years, living in the same city, 3 miles apart, I did not talk to either my mother or my father or see them at all for 7 years because of my anger. And then I eventually figured out that it was all my doing. That I had made some major mistakes in how I was looking at the situation that I didn't appreciate at the time. But now I had seen it and I was like, oh my gosh, that really was dumb of me. And then I apologized. I called him up. I said, I want to come talk to you. And I owned up to, how I have been looking at things incorrectly. And I know I put him through a lot of heartache and everything. And I woke up when I woke up. I mean, I'm sorry I didn't wake up earlier, but
Sure.
and they were very gracious. They very accepted me back, and we had and both of them have died now. But for the rest of the years that we had together, we had very good relationship together. Once we mended that episode, but that's 7 years. I mean, I could have avoided that whole scenario, plus all the failed relationships that I had, and the heartache that went along with that, and a lot of stuff could be avoided if we knew this stuff earlier on in our lives. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Well, it's funny because my mother had a stroke at 96, as she would have said, 96 and a half years young. And when she had her stroke, I went up to Michigan to stay with her. And doctors had said, she either has a day, she's got a month, she might have years, but she's not going to really get any better. And I had always thought that my mother and I had a love-hate relationship. So, I mean, called her every week, and I heard her saying, griping to me every week. And I would get angry, but not directly to her. But I took that time when I was with her that we actually talked. And it was amazing that all that anger that I had against her when she would call me was just her personality. How can you get mad at somebody's personality? She didn't do any harm, okay?
Yeah, she wasn't trying to hurt anybody.
Things. There was no harm, okay?
Yeah.
I was letting it harm me.
Yes.
Um,
And by the way, that's another area where this knowing this can be very useful when a lot of people are taking care of elderly parents now. A lot of people our age are taking care of elderly parents, and when someone starts to get senile and they start to lose their mental faculties, they start to get angry, they start to lash out. Their children are trying to help them, they're disrupting their lives to sacrifice to help them, and they keep getting hit with all this anger, and that makes them angry, and you get the anger going back and forth. And it's very nice to understand this whole anger phenomenon, where it comes from in both parties, so you can make more sense of what's going on. It doesn't drive you as crazy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit more about the book. When did you write the book, and what prompted you finally to write the book?
Well, I spent a couple years treating people in my 10-session program that was very, very successful, I'm retired. There's only so many people that I can handle one-on-one, in a coaching relationship each week. So I knew I would make an impact in those people, but I really wanted to make a broader impact. So I decided, well, I'm going to take everything that I teach in this program, I'm going to put it into a book so that people can have easier access, and they don't have to necessarily sign up for a 10-week coaching program with me and have the expense and the time and the expense that goes with that. So that was my goal. That's what I did. And I literally put every single thing that I taught, every principle that I knew, things that I discovered, I put it all in there. The only thing I can't do in the book is, like you say, when my son and I got into an argument yesterday about X, Y, and Z, I can't coach you individually on that situation to take you through the 3 filters. But I give a lot of examples in the book and some advice on how to go about doing that yourself. And so that you can, if you work at it, you can do it yourself eventually. So, but I basically put the whole technology in the book, and it's called Dr. Orman's Life-Changing Anger Cure. So you can find it on Amazon. Just put in Life-Changing Anger Cure, you'll find it, or my name, and you'll find it. I published it in April of this year. So
I belong to 2 groups online. One is through AARP. It's called the Ethel Circle. So it's mostly women. And another one is called Aging Orphans Alone. And these are adults, typically either who are estranged from their children or never had children. And maybe most of their family is gone. And the anger that I hear in both of these groups is so intense.
Yes.
And listening to it has made me shed a lot of mine, because it's like, it's not worth, that. And it's hard to tell that to somebody, because somebody would have told me that 20 years ago, hey, Karen, just like throw it away. You don't have to worry about it anymore. I wouldn't have, I would have thought I had to deal with every little piece and part of it.
Mhm.
And the reality of it is when you do that, the anger compounds.
Yeah, if you don't know how to do it in the best way, you can make it worse. Yeah. Yeah.
So again, the name of the book is,
Dr. Orman's Life-Changing Anger Cure.
well, I'm going to make sure that's in the notes for the show today.
Mhm.
I'm going to get the book so that I can read it and I can be less angry because, come on, we all know anger is going to pop up in our life. I don't think we can go forever without ever feeling some form of anger.
Yes, and it still pops up for me, even though I've had very little, much less of it than I had in my 20s and 30s, 90% less. It still pops up for me every once in a while, but every time it pops up now, I know exactly where it's coming from within me. I know exactly the three filters. I know how to interrogate the three filters, and I know how to make the anger go away very quickly. So it's rare for me that anger lasts more than 15 minutes. I don't go to bed angry about anything. I don't carry anger with me for days and weeks and years, and it's like some people do. I know exactly what's going on now. I know exactly how to attack it, and I can win against anger anytime I want to. On the other hand, if I want to be angry, let's say I'm talking to a customer service rep and I'm not getting the solution that I want, I may decide to get angry just for effect, just because they'll bump it up to a supervisor or something, that somebody will eventually come around and give you what you think you deserve. So anger can, the nice thing is if you know those filters, you now have your hands on the controls, so you can either turn it on or turn it off as the situation calls for. The times when anger can be useful, and the times when most of the time it's harmful, but there are a few occasions when it might be helpful or useful.
Well, this time of year, when I get all those Medicare calls, is when I start to get really angry with the people on the other end. You have no idea who I am and leave me alone. My husband, on the other hand, he just hits block on his phone. He doesn't even say a word. So probably should take him up on his attitude. I wouldn't have to at least yell and shout for a few seconds.
I had a similar thing when I had a house a while back that I was going to do for sale by owner. And people told me, don't do that. You'll get inundated with real estate agents calling you to list your home. And I said, and so I knew it was coming, and I decided I would just play with it. Okay, so they would call me, and I'd answer the phone, and they'd say, boy, I could get you so much money for your house. Are you interested in having me list your house? Well, I'm not interested in talking to real estate agents. And then they go, but, and I would go like, yeah, but in order to do that, I have to be interested in talking to real estate agents, and I'm not interested in talking to real estate agents. And then they go, then they'd say something else, and I go, well, that's nice, but to do that, I would need to be interested in talking to real estate agents, and I'm not interested in talking. I wanted to see how long they would go before they finally hung the phone up, because I just kept, whatever they said, I just kept saying, that's nice, but I would need to be interested in talking to real estate agents, and I'm not, so I can't do that.
I like that. That way you had to stay calm too. So you couldn't let it anger you. So
it didn't because I turned it into a game, and it was like, okay, how long will they go? What's the longest I've gotten somebody to get?
I love that. Sounds wonderful. Well, thank you for joining me today. And to all of you listening out there, all of Dr. Orman's information will be in our show notes. And we look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thank you.
Nice meeting you and nice speaking with your audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.